Hey everyone, so in this video, I'm going to try to help out your editing process with some ways to get those white walls looking crisp, clean, and bright. Welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Matthew. If it's your first time here, I'm an architecture and interiors photographer based in Kansas City. If you're subscribed to my channel already, you may have noticed that, for the past several weeks, coming on close to 2 months, I've been a little absent from the YouTube scene, and that's simply just because work and life kind of got in the way. And so because I do all the editing and videoing and all this sort of stuff by myself, YouTube kind of had to take a back seat for a while. Things really aren't slowing down that much when it comes to my regular work. To be perfectly frank, may not be able to pump out as many YouTube videos as I'd like, but I am going to try to stay fairly regular with the YouTube videos as much as I possibly can. I was reviewing some of my past YouTube videos and realized I think I've neglected to mention at the beginning of almost every single one to make sure to hit the thumbs up button if you like the video. It really does help out the exposure with the video. There's something going on behind the scenes with the YouTube algorithm. If you have any interest in the subject of architecture photography whatsoever, make sure to hit the subscribe button. I think those numbers help out the channel as well. Hey, another side note, if you follow me on Instagram, you may have noticed I got a brand new desk. This is a custom desk made just for me, just for these YouTube videos. I officially call this is my YouTube desk. It was custom made by a company here in Kansas City called KC. This is not a sponsored video whatsoever. I really want to give them a shout out because I absolutely love this desk. For one thing, it was custom made for me, and it is top-notch quality. This thing is stout. It is a solid piece of real wood, by the way, not a fake kind of wood that my previous desk was that I bought off Amazon, which actually has now moved over here. I love this thing. It's got a live edge on this side. I gave them the exact measurements and specifications that I needed to kind of fit in my somewhat small YouTube studio space, and it came out better than I could have hoped. I love this thing. If you live here in Kansas City or somewhat near the area, I strongly encourage you to check out KC. I'll put a link to their Instagram and their website in the description of this video. Okay, so let's get to the subject at hand. Now, granted, I've only been doing this YouTube channel for a few months now, but every now and then I will receive a message either over Instagram or the comments section asking about how I do some specific things when it comes to the editing of the photos. They're all over the place, but one common thing I've heard time and time again is how I get the walls in my photos looking crisp, bright, and overall kind of getting that clean white wall look. Now, when someone wants clean white walls in their photo, you can assume that they're starting off with some sort of dirty looking walls in the image. So what does that mean? For the most part, especially with white walls, dirty or muddy looking walls can stem from one of maybe several things. It could be that the white balance is off. Maybe there was some sort of goofy HDR process that was used, or you're getting light with color casts of different color tones that's bouncing all around in a space. Now, I recently photographed a residential property that I thought would be a fantastic example to kind of walk you through my process and show you how I handle some of these issues in the edit. So let's go to the computer and I'll walk you through it. So this is the image we're going to start with, but just as a little bit of a teaser, I'll show you the end result right away. This was the end product or the final image I delivered to the client. Now, if you're looking for those 100% pure white walls, I'll let you know right up front, that's not the look I typically go for in my photos. So I'll give you a few tips on if you want to go for that look, but personally, I'm not a big fan of that look. Even if the walls in your photo are 100% pure white, removing 100% of all color in the image from those walls, my personal opinion, I actually think it makes the image look a little sterile, a little bland, and just gives it an overall bleak and lifeless look. Sometimes it can even come off as a rendering. And I know there are some photographers who absolutely love that look. And if that's what you're going for, all power to you. But personally, I think removing 100% of all color from a white wall, it makes it look a little lifeless. The reason being is maybe the human eye does not perceive the color cast in a room as heavy and as saturated as, say, the average camera does, the human eye will still pick up on the fact that light, although it is maybe coming through, say, one window, that light is bouncing off different objects in the room and then hitting the white walls as well. So yes, light coming in through a window will hit the wall, but you're also going to have light that is bouncing off the wood floors, or maybe there is a blue rug, or maybe a massive purple painting, and the light that bounces off of those objects will hit the wall as well. So you will start to get color casts of maybe browns, yellows, purples, and blues in that type of scenario. But instead of removing them 100% altogether, personally, I am more of the mindset to really lessen them and maybe make those color casts a little bit more subtle, in turn giving the photo a more realistic and natural look. But I'll walk you through the process here, because a lot of this starts in Lightroom, and even backtracking a little bit more, it starts with how you're shooting the room to begin with. So here's a shot of the room with all the lights on, which brings me to step number one and how to get your walls looking crisp, clean, and white. Step number one is to turn all the lights off. Now you might be saying, but Matthew, my client or my personal preference is for my photos to look as if the lights were on. Stick with me here. So in this instance, I shut all the lights off and took some exposures with just 100% natural light. So if I remember correctly, I think I started with this exposure here. Now, so if you notice, the walls are still not 100% perfect, even though we have turned the lights off. In general though, when we're dealing with getting that crisp, clean white wall look, again, the reason that it may not look clean is because we are getting different types of color in those walls. So I tend to view those colors as, my personal term is rogue colors, which tend to be yellows, magentas, blues, and greens. So again, by step number one, turning the lights off, you're really lowering the amount of yellows and oranges you're going to get on the walls. But in this specific instance, this room, as you'll notice through the windows, we had a wall of trees in the backyard, and there's not much space between the back of the house and the trees. At most, I'd say maybe 15 to 20 feet. So a lot of the light that is coming in through the windows from the back of the house is light that's being bounced off the trees. So the consequence of that is a lot of the light coming in through the windows is going to have a green color cast to it. So when it comes to picking out an image that I may want to work with as my base layer, or what I'm going to build all my layers off of, I want to get the white balance good. It may not be perfect, it may not be spot on, and honestly, we're probably not going to get a perfect white balance because we have colors that are all over the place. So if you'll notice, some of the light coming in through these upper windows is blue. So if I correct the white balance for there, now we have a very strong orange and yellow hue to the image all over the place. But if I say do a white balance over here, well, now it looks too cold, it looks too blue. And especially if I do a color balance check here, by where a lot of the light, you can clearly see the color cast coming in as of a green hue to it. Now it's overly magenta because the white balance has now kind of overcompensated for it. I've edited this image already, and honestly, there's no perfect solution or answer to this scenario when dealing with the base image. You just kind of have to eyeball it. Maybe take a average of your white balance check from all these different spots and figure out somewhere in the middle. We'll deal with the specifics of individual colors in Photoshop. So for my base image in this instance, I'm going to put the color temperature at 4800 and with the tint at +40. And this is the photo, or my base image of what I started off with in Photoshop. So if you want a real quick and dirty way to get rid of some of these color casts, this brings me to step number two, which is extract the colors that you don't want on your white walls. So I'll add a hue and saturation adjustment layer on top of this one. And to find out actually how much color there really is in the walls, I'm going to look at each one individually. First, we'll start with magentas. How I like to find out is how much magenta is actually in the walls is to take the saturation and bump it up all the way to 100. And then you find out how much magenta is actually appearing in this photo. And you might automatically say, well, Matthew, why don't you just take the saturation of these colors all the way down to 100? And you can, if you want. Personally, I don't do that. Again, I think it's going to take away from the natural look. Obviously, the magenta tones are appearing naturally in that space. So I think if I remove these color casts 100%, again, it's going to give it kind of that lifeless and bland look. Generally, I'll take them down anywhere from about 20 to maybe 50 on this scale. There's not a whole lot of magenta in this specific photo, so I'm okay taking it to roughly 40. Next, we'll move on to the blues, and I'm gonna imagine there's quite a bit of blue in here. Yeah. Now, we're getting a lot of blue on not only the walls, but you'll notice the floor, even the fireplace, some of the furniture as well. I'm gonna do the same thing. I'm gonna take it down to about, I think in this instance, roughly 30. Cyans, we might have something similar as a little bit. So since there's not a whole lot of cyan in this image, I'm okay taking this down to about 50, negative 50. And then for greens, I imagine we're probably gonna get a decent amount of greens. Oh, not as much as I suspected, but there is a little bit there. Now, obviously, if we took the greens all the way down, now that's gonna make the trees outside the windows look a little bland and bleak as well. So what I would do is I'll take the greens again, maybe down to about 50, but then with a black brush at 100%, just a nice soft brush, is undo some of that adjustment layer on the windows themselves. You're not gonna notice a huge drastic difference, but I wanna leave the color in as much as possible to where it belongs naturally. Now you'll notice I didn't touch yellows yet. The reason I don't do that quite yet is I like to adjust the yellows on its own separate hue and saturation adjustment layer. So I'm gonna add another one, and in this instance, I'm gonna select the yellows. Now if I bump this all the way up, the yellows are everywhere. So yes, if I pull the yellows down, see, look what happens when I pull the yellows down all the way to 100. Now it looks like a borderline black and white photo, and we only removed one color, yellow, in this instance. So let's bump it back up here again and kind of analyze where the yellow is appearing in this image. So the yellow, aside from the walls, is definitely in the floor. We're definitely getting in the wood of the table there, definitely in the furniture, and a little bit in the beams on the ceiling as well. So I want to leave those alone. I would prefer to leave the yellow tones in those items because, again, as you saw, if we take this all the way down to 100%, now, yes, the walls look a little cleaner, but now everything else, the color and the life has been sapped out of it. So just analyzing the walls, I'm going to take the walls down to about maybe negative 25. But clearly we've done the same thing to the furniture and the floor and the table. So just like I did with the windows, I'm gonna take a black soft brush, and on this adjustment layer, I'm gonna remove that adjustment on the areas where I wanna leave it. Clearly we wanna leave it on these fall decorations on the table as well. We'll paint it back into the floors, maybe even these frames here on the wall. There's a mirror here in the hallway. Yeah, see, that's quite a bit of difference. It doesn't have to be perfect. We're kind of doing a little quick and dirty way here. Lights above this horse photo, they're brass. I'll leave the yellow in that. And then the beams here in the ceiling. So if you look at this layer mask of my removal, it's not perfect. I really don't think it needs to be. If you want to be real precise and do this with the pen tool, I would say all power to you. Personally, I don't think you'd need to because that's pretty time consuming. And then I'm going to do the same thing with the windows because we've removed the yellow from the trees outside as well. I'm gonna add those back in. So that's pretty much it for step 2, which is extracting the colors that you don't want there. So this is a before and this is an after. Not a drastic difference. If you want to, you can remove some of these a little bit further. Like for instance, if I color sample from that wall, you'll notice that, yeah, it's picking up a little bit of yellow tones in there as well. I would imagine if I hover my color picker over the, yeah, we're getting still a decent amount of yellows, which is perfectly fine. I don't want to remove the yellow tones 100%. You can if you want, but we're just talking about my personal preference at this point. So now that I've removed a majority of the colors that I don't want to appear in the photo, the next step is getting these walls to look bright. Yes, I've removed the color cast in them, but now they look just a little muted. So what do we do? In order to make my white walls look bright is step number 3, which is to brighten your midtones. Yes, when we're there in the room, we perceive these walls as bright, but if you look in Photoshop, again, if I color sample from some of these areas and pull up the color picker, we're still kind of in that mid-tone range. If I sample here from the ceiling, see we're almost smack dab in the middle of the grays. This is probably pretty bright over here, but if I look at the color sample, see we got a little bit of green left over, but still, we're not all the way to pure white. So if you want to get that bright, wall look, I would say brighten your midtones one way or another. The way I do it is by taking a curves adjustment layer, and I'll grab the curve just a little bit right of center and then just give it a little boost. That's about it. But obviously now we've brightened up some of the darker tones, i.e. the fireplace and the beams up top. So if you want to kind of control those, I take another point here on the lower end of the curves and bring that down. And now we've added a little bit of contrast to the photo and kind of made it pop a little bit more. And you can see the before and after here. Now, you can do this to taste. You can go crazy with this. You could probably give it this crazy Instagram-y look. I try to be a little subtle with it because, again, the look I'm going for is more of that natural look, but still looking clean and professional. Now, when it comes to color cast, normally this is about the extent of as much as I do with it. If I wanted to go kind of that extra mile to really remove 100% of all color casts, I might do something like this. We have a very strong contrasty look to this image, so I'm going to merge everything to its own layer by itself, and I'm going to duplicate this layer. Let's desaturate this layer 100%. So in this instance, in this clearly black and white photo, yes, the walls are 100% color cast free. They are pure white, or to be technical, different brightness levels of gray. But for the time being, I'm going to hide this layer. I'm going to hit Alt, add layer mask. So sticking with this layer here, I'm going to go over to channels. I'm going to look for a layer that gives me the most contrast all on its own. I'm going to go with the blue here, and then I'm going to hit this button here at the bottom to create what's called an alpha channel. Command D to deselect that one, and then select just the alpha channel, and then I'm going to hit Command M to adjust the curves layer. And basically what I'm going to try to do is anything that's even slightly dark, or basically anything that's not a white wall, I'm going to try to make it completely black in this mask, which is what I'm creating, and then brighten up the contrast on this channel to make anything that's a white wall to make it pure white. And then again, I'm going to select this, Command click on the alpha channel, and we're going to go over to layers, and then we're going to now bring up the layer that we hid before, which is the desaturated layer. And I'm just going to hide the marching ants for the time being. And then what we'll do is we'll use a brush, try to paint in this desaturated layer, which hopefully only appears on the white walls. Doing my best to try to avoid anything with color that I want to keep. And I'm just doing this a real quick and dirty way. And I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but that should at least give you a pretty good idea of how to do this on your own. Now, again, if it was up to me, I would actually take this layer and lower the opacity a bit so as not to make the walls look 100% pure white, probably to taste, maybe leave it at 50, 60, 70, somewhere around there. Now, I did mention at the beginning, if the look that you need to deliver to your clients or is to your personal preferences for the interior lights to be on, let's go back into Lightroom and I'll show you how we can do that and apply that to this image that we just cleaned up. Now, I'm going to adjust the highlights and shadows of this as if I was going to deliver it to the client. The only thing I'm really not going to do is bump up the saturation or the vibrance, anything like that, and you'll see why here in a bit. Let's try to, adjust the brightness levels and contrast to the way that we would want it, as if we were just going to turn this single image into our client and get it as good as possible without adjusting anything with the color with this file. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this, so I'm going to take this image, open it up in Photoshop. I'm going to take this one and place it on top of this. Now I'm going to hide it by holding Alt, add layer mask, and I'm going to change the blending mode of this layer to luminosity. And all I'm going to do is basically paint in the brightness levels of the layer that was where the lights were on, and paint that onto this one. And now we have an image where it looks like the lights were on. Again, I'm not 100% satisfied with this, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the layer, the luminosity layer, and duplicate it. I'm going to remove the layer mask, and I'm going to change this one back to normal, and then I'm going to hide it. And all I'm going to do very, very subtly is paint in from the normal layer, just paint in some of the color tones of the one under it. You're going to get a little bit of that orange hue, the realistic orange hue, which you do see from the lights, but I'm going to keep it to just around the lights. I'm not going to paint in that orange glow back into the walls and the furniture and all that stuff. We're kind of undoing everything that we just worked on. So that's pretty much it. Clearly, there's a lot of other things I need to do to this image. There's a lot of tweaking, adjusting verticals, maybe some more brightness and contrast adjustments, things like that. But hopefully that gives you a pretty good idea of kind of my process in getting the walls looking clean, bright, and white. If you have any more questions about this, please don't hesitate to let me know in the comments. I'll try to do my best to answer them. Or you can drop me a message or a question over Instagram. Feel free to follow me at Matthew A. Photo. If you got anything out of this video, please make sure to give me a thumbs up. Maybe even consider subscribing to the channel. I appreciate you taking the time to watch, and we'll see you all in the next one.